criticism you replay on loop will lose its grip. You will set boundaries without feeling cruel, and something will shift that makes everything else possible. You will stop believing something is fundamentally wrong with you. 8 authentic Buddhist stories answer the questions that keep you exhausted. Not modern parables or motivational tales. These come from the Pali Canon, from ancient Jatakas, from texts preserved for centuries. Why your mind jumps constantly and what actually settles it. How others' expectations became your cage, and how to step free. The difference between absorbing someone's anger and protecting yourself from it. These aren't lectures you must endure or principles you should memorize. They are lived experiences of people who struggled exactly as you do. A monk whose thoughts wouldn't stop. A person who learned that beauty can become burden. Someone who discovered you can be kind without being a doormat. Each story delivers specific medicine. By the time we finish, anxiety won't vanish, but you will relate to it differently. The weight pressing on your chest will feel lighter because you will understand what you've been carrying and why you never had to. Settle into comfort wherever you are. We begin with what the Buddha taught about the restless mind, using the image of a monkey in the Himalayan forests, grabbing one branch after another, never at rest. You know this monkey intimately. Let me show you what happens when you finally stop trying to control it. The Buddha was teaching a group of monks who could not sit still. Not their bodies. Their bodies were perfectly quiet, but their minds were in constant motion, jumping from one thought to the next without pause. They would sit down to meditate, close their eyes, and immediately the thoughts would start. What needs doing later? What happened earlier? What might happen tomorrow? They tried to focus on their breath, and within seconds, they were planning dinner. They attempted to watch their thoughts pass, and instead got caught in stories about the thoughts is less than Hasson. 0 is greater than is greater than. They felt like failures. Meditation was supposed to be simple. Just sit and be present. But their minds refused to cooperate. The more they tried to force stillness, the more chaotic it became. You know this experience. You lie in bed trying to sleep, telling yourself to stop thinking, and that command itself becomes another thought to follow. You're at work trying to concentrate on a task, and your attention splinters into 12 directions. You sit down intending to relax, and within moments, you're reviewing everything you should have said in yesterday's conversation. The exhausting part isn't the thoughts themselves. It's the endless effort to control them. The Buddha understood this completely. He had spent years in the Himalayan wilderness, sitting in forests so remote that human sounds disappeared entirely. He knew what it meant to watch the mind in silence, to see its patterns without distraction. And he knew what these monks were experiencing because he had experienced it himself. So he gave them an image. Picture the mountain forests, he said. Dense trees reaching towards sky, branches layered so thick that sunlight barely penetrates. In these forests, lives a creature driven by pure restless energy. It grabs one branch, swings, releases before it even settles, reaches for another, lets go, reaches again, branch after branch after branch, never landing, never at peace. It's not moving toward anything. It's not running from danger. It just moves, because movement is its nature. The monks saw themselves immediately in this image. One thought grabbed, then released for the next, then the next. I need to finish that task. Becomes, but what about this other thing? Becomes, I'm not doing enough. Becomes, why am I thinking about this? Becomes, I should be more present. Each thought a branch, held for a moment, dropped for another. The mind never settles, because it's already reaching for what comes next. One of the younger monks raised his hand. But Master, how do I stop the creature from jumping? How do I make it stay on one branch? The Buddha smiled. This was the question everyone asks. The question that reveals the fundamental misunderstanding. You don't stop it, he said. The monk looked confused. Then how will my mind ever be at peace? Watch what happens when you try to stop it, the Buddha said. The creature is jumping through the forest. You yell at it to stop. Does it stop? The monk thought about this. No, it probably jumps faster, startled by the noise. Exactly, the Buddha said. And if you try to catch it, if you chase after it trying to grab it and force it to be still, it would run from me, the monk answered. It would never stop moving as long as I was pursuing it. This is what you do with your thoughts, the Buddha explained. A thought appears. You immediately try to catch it or push it away. That effort is like chasing the creature through the forest. You think you're solving the problem, but you're creating more movement, more chaos, more restlessness. The monks sat with this. They had been fighting their own minds for so long, believing that peace required winning the fight. But the Buddha was suggesting something completely different. So what do we do? Another monk asked. Watch it, the Buddha said simply. Just watch. The creature jumps from branch to branch. You don't chase it. You don't yell at it. You don't try to convince it to be different. You simply stand in the forest and observe. This is what's happening right now. And when you watch without interfering, something remarkable occurs. The creature begins to slow down, not because you forced it, but because you stopped energizing its restlessness with your reaction. One of the older monks spoke up. But Master, when I try to just watch my thoughts, I end up thinking about watching my thoughts. I have a thought about my breath, then a thought about having a thought about my breath, then a thought about trying not to think. It never ends. The Buddha nodded. Yes, this happens. And what do you do when you notice you're thinking about thinking? The monk paused. I get frustrated with myself. I think I'm doing it wrong. That frustration, is that also a thought? the Buddha asked. Yes, the monk said slowly. So watch that one too, the Buddha said. Notice, this is frustration appearing. This is the thought that I'm doing it wrong. You don't need to fix anything. You're not trying to achieve a state where thoughts never appear. You're learning to recognize thinking as thinking, without getting pulled into the story the thought wants to tell. He continued, right now, a thought appears in your mind. Let's say it's worry about something you need to do tomorrow. Immediately, without noticing, you step inside the worry. You start planning, rehearsing, imagining scenarios. You're no longer aware that thinking is happening. You've become the thinking. But if you catch it, if you notice, this is worry appearing, suddenly there's space. The worry is still there, but you're not inside it. You're watching it, like watching weather move across the sky. A young monk asked, how long does it take before the creature stops jumping, before thoughts stop appearing? The Buddha considered this. That's the wrong question. Thoughts will always appear. That's what minds do. The creature will always be a creature of the forest. But over time, with patient watching, the frantic jumping slows. The desperate grasping eases, and you discover something profound. Even when thoughts are present, you can be at peace. Because peace isn't the absence of thought. It's the absence of struggle with thought. The monks began practicing that very day. They returned to their meditation cushions with different instructions now. Not to empty the mind, not to achieve perfect concentration, but simply to notice when thinking occurred. One monk found himself planning his afternoon tasks within seconds of sitting down. His old habit would have been to berate himself, to try forcing his attention back to the breath through sheer willpower. Instead, he practiced what the Buddha taught. This is planning. This is what's happening now. The planning thought didn't disappear immediately, but something shifted. He was aware of planning rather than lost in it. The thought continued for a few more seconds, then dissolved on its own. Another monk noticed anxiety about an upcoming conversation with a difficult elder. The anxiety wanted to spiral into rehearsing what to say, imagining how it might go wrong, preparing defenses. But he caught it. This is anxiety about the future. Just naming it created distance. The anxiety was still present. He could feel it in his chest, but he wasn't drowning in its story. He was standing on the shore watching it, rather than being swept away by the current. A third monk discovered something unexpected. He had been sitting for perhaps 10 minutes, watching thoughts come and go, when suddenly he realized no thought was present. He was simply aware. The gap lasted maybe 3 seconds before a thought appeared. Oh, there's no thought right now. And the gap closed. But he had tasted something. A space that existed before thinking, underneath thinking, always available. Over the following weeks, the Buddha continued teaching them the subtleties of this practice. Most of you think watching means commenting on thoughts, he said one morning. A thought appears, and immediately you narrate it. I'm thinking about food. That's a thought about food. I shouldn't be thinking about food. This isn't watching. This is adding more thinking on top of thinking. He gestured toward the forest around them. When you see a bird fly past, do you narrate it? Do you say, that's a bird? I'm seeing a bird? Birds are flying? No. You simply see it. Watching thoughts is the same. The thought appears. You register its presence, and it passes. No commentary needed, just clear seeing. The monks practiced this more refined attention. It was harder than it sounded. The mind wanted to explain itself, to narrate its own experience, to make sense of what was happening. But gradually, they learned the difference between awareness and thinking about awareness. They also learned that some thoughts had more energy than others. A passing thought about needing water was easy to notice and release. But a thought laden with shame or fear or desire would hook them more deeply. These thoughts didn't want to be just watched. They wanted attention, engagement, resolution. What do we do with the strong ones? A monk asked. The thoughts that won't leave even when I notice them? The Buddha's answer was gentle. Watch them longer. These thoughts have more energy because you've fed them more in the past. They've been watered regularly by your attention, so they have deeper roots. But the watching is the same. You don't need to pull them out by force. Just keep seeing them clearly, without following their story, and eventually, even the strong ones lose their grip. This teaching spread beyond the monks. Lay people who came to hear the Buddha speak learned the practice and brought it into their daily lives. A merchant found he could notice his anxious planning about business deals without being consumed by it. A mother caught herself worrying about her children's futures and realized she was missing the actual children in front of her. A farmer recognized his resentful thoughts about weather and neighbors, and in that recognition, found they bothered him less. What they all discovered was this: you can't control which thoughts appear, but you can change your relationship to them. You can learn to be the forest, spacious and still, while the creature moves through you. This is available to you right now. Think about what happens when you remember something embarrassing from your past. Normally, you're inside the memory instantly. You're reliving the moment, cringing at what you said, imagining what others thought. 10 minutes pass, maybe an hour, and you've been nowhere except inside that thought. But what if you caught it early? The memory appears, and before you step inside, you notice this is a thought about something that happened, not as criticism, not as command to stop, but as simple fact. The embarrassment might still pulse through you. The memory might still feel vivid, but you're not trapped in it. You're aware of it happening, which means some part of you is outside it, watching. This is the practice. Not achieving perfect mental silence. Not becoming someone who never worries or replays conversations. Just learning to catch the moment when thinking begins, and in that catching, discovering a tiny space of freedom. At first, You'll notice after you've been lost in thought for several minutes. That's fine. The noticing itself, whenever it arrives, is the practice. You were lost. Now you're found. That moment of return is what matters. Over time, you'll notice sooner. The gaps between thoughts might expand. Eventually, you might catch thoughts the instant they form, before they pull you into their story. Right now, thoughts are probably appearing as you listen. Maybe doubt. Will this actually work? Maybe planning. What I need to do after this. Maybe judgment. I should be better at staying present. Can you notice them without following them? Just see. Thinking is happening. That seeing, that bare awareness, is the beginning of freedom. The creature still leaps through the forest of your mind, but you're no longer exhausted from chasing it. You're learning to stand still, to watch, and in that stillness, something settles that you've been seeking for a long time. But understanding your own mind doesn't free you from another exhausting pattern, the constant weight of other people's expectations, the cage built from their admiration. There's a story about someone whose very beauty became a prison, and what they learned about freedom when the whole world wanted to possess them. In the high mountain forests of the Himalayas, there lived a creature who had never thought about his own beauty. His feathers shimmered gold in the morning light, shifted to bronze at midday, glowed like copper at sunset. But he didn't know this was remarkable. He simply lived. He drank from cold mountain streams, danced in clearings where sunlight broke through the canopy, roosted in trees that had stood for centuries. His life was uncomplicated. His life was free. He had no name, needed no name. The forest knew him by his presence. The streams recognized him by his footprints. He existed without audience, without judgment, without anyone deciding what his beauty meant or what they wanted to do with it. In the early mornings, mist would rise from the valleys below, and he would glide through it, feeling the cool moisture on his wings. In the afternoons, he would find patches of sunlight and spread his feathers to warm them. These simple pleasures required nothing from him except presence. Then one night, hundreds of miles south in a distant kingdom, a queen had a dream. She saw him moving through shadows, wings catching light, and something in her mind seized the image. When she woke, the wanting remained. Not appreciation, hunger, the kind that says, I must own this. I must possess what I've seen. I cannot rest until it's mine to display. She described the vision to her king, her voice urgent with desire. Find this creature, she said. Bring it to the palace. I want to show the world what belongs to our kingdom. I want proof that we possess what others can only dream of. The king sent his best hunters north. They traveled for weeks, asking villagers and hermits about a bird with golden feathers. Eventually, they found the right mountain range, the right forest. They saw tracks near streams. They found clearings where grass had been pressed into patterns by dancing feet. They knew he was close. They set their first trap near the stream where he drank each morning. A net concealed in the branches above the water, designed to drop when he landed. They wanted him alive and perfect. The queen had been specific about that. Not harmed, just captured, just owned. The golden one arrived at dawn as usual. He descended through the trees toward the water, and something felt wrong. A smell that didn't belong. A stillness in the air that made his feathers prickle. He veered away at the last moment, saw the net waiting, and understood in a flash. His life had changed. The innocence of simply existing was over. Someone wanted him, and wanting, he would soon learn, was different from appreciating. Over the following weeks, traps appeared everywhere he went, snares hidden along his usual walking paths, nets concealed in the trees where he roosted, other birds released as bait to lure him into clearings where hunters waited with capture devices. The hunters studied his patterns obsessively. They learned when he drank, where he slept, how he moved through his territory. They mapped every detail of his life, not to understand him, but to control him. They anticipated everything. His entire existence transformed. Every morning now, he had to check for hidden nets before approaching water. Every clearing might be an ambush. Every sound could signal hunters approaching. The forest that had been home became a landscape of potential danger. And the reason, the only reason, was the way he looked. He began to understand something profound. His beauty, which had been neutral fact, had become currency in someone else's economy of desire. He was being hunted not for food, not because he threatened anyone, not because of anything he had done, but because a woman hundreds of miles away had dreamed of him and decided he should belong to her. His beauty, which had simply existed as part of his nature, had become the source of constant threat. He couldn't make himself less golden. That wasn't possible, and it wasn't the answer. His feathers were what they were. Dimming himself wouldn't solve the problem. It would only mean living as a shadow of what he was while still being hunted. But he could learn vigilance. He could adapt. He stopped following routines. He drank at different times each day, never establishing patterns the hunters could predict. He roosted in different trees every night, never returning to the same branch twice in a week. He learned to read the forest for disturbances, the wrong smell on the wind, the too quiet birds, the feeling of being observed. His awareness sharpened, not from fear, but from clear understanding of what was actually happening. Sometimes he would arrive at his usual drinking spot and sense the trap before seeing it. His body knew the difference between forest emptiness and hunter emptiness. He learned to trust these instincts. Other times, he would deliberately approach a clearing where he sensed waiting hunters, then veer away at the last second, teaching them that he was aware that he could not be fooled by their patience. And through this sharpened awareness, something deeper emerged. He began to see the situation for what it truly was. The queen had never seen him, except in a dream. She didn't know how he moved through the world, what sounds he made in the early morning, what his actual life consisted of. She wanted to possess an image, a projection, a thing she could point to and say, "This belongs to me. This proves my worth. This demonstrates my power to acquire what others cannot." The hunters pursuing him year after year weren't interested in his well-being. They didn't care about his nature or his freedom. They wanted to trap him, cage him, put him on display so others could admire what their kingdom owned. Their attention was a form of violence dressed as admiration. They would call it appreciation while constructing the cage. This understanding settled into him like stillness after storm. Being wanted is not the same as being valued. Being admired is not the same as being understood. Being praised for your beauty means nothing if that praise comes with the demand that you surrender your freedom to serve someone else's image of you. Years passed. The hunters never caught him, not because he hid in caves or dulled his feathers, but because he learned to live with clarity instead of assumption. He remained exactly himself, golden, magnificent, dancing in clearings when the spirit moved him. But he no longer believed his beauty was something others would simply appreciate from a respectful distance. He understood that what made him extraordinary also made him a target for those who confused possession with appreciation. The queen's desire never faded. She died still longing for what she could not own, still believing that capturing him would have completed something in herself. The hunters grew old and gave up their pursuit. New hunters were sent, but they too failed. And the Golden One lived out his days in the mountains, drinking from streams, moving through the forest, on his own terms, free not because he hid, but because he refused to let others' desire for him create any obligation. This story lives in your life right now. You know what it feels like to be praised for something, then trapped by that praise. Someone notices you're reliable, and suddenly you're carrying everyone's work. Someone admires your patience, and now you can't express frustration without disappointing them. Someone loves your strength, and showing vulnerability feels like betrayal. The quality that was simply part of your nature becomes a role you must perform constantly. And beneath that performance, you're exhausted. Like the golden peacock, you can't unbecome what you genuinely are. If you're naturally capable, you can't fake incompetence. If you're genuinely kind, you can't pretend cruelty. Your qualities are real. But here's what the story reveals. Those qualities exist for your own life, not for others' convenience. The peacock's beauty didn't exist to fulfill a queen's dream. Your competence doesn't exist to solve everyone's problems. Your kindness doesn't exist to prevent people from experiencing appropriate consequences. Your strength doesn't exist to hold up people who refuse to stand on their own. Most people make the opposite mistake. They receive admiration for something and immediately build their entire identity around maintaining that admiration. The compliments become commands. The appreciation becomes expectation. And years later, they wake up exhausted, performing a version of themselves they can barely remember choosing. Think about the parts of yourself that receive praise. Maybe your family admires your success, so you stay in a career that's slowly killing you. Maybe friends depend on your constant availability, so you've forgotten how to say you need time alone. Maybe your partner loves your stability, so you hide every moment of fear or doubt. You've translated their appreciation into debt. You've heard, "I admire this about you," and somehow understood it as, "You must always be this for me." But they didn't cage you. You caged yourself by believing their vision of you was your responsibility to maintain forever. The teaching here isn't invisibility. It's not about hiding your light or pretending to be less than you are. The peacock remained golden. He still danced in the clearings, but he stopped letting his beauty determine where he could go, when he could drink, how he had to live. He adapted to reality without changing his fundamental nature. You can do the same. Remain yourself, capable, kind, strong, whatever you genuinely are. But stop performing those qualities on command. Stop believing that being admired means being endlessly available. Stop thinking you owe people consistency with their image of you. What if you disappointed someone? Really imagine it. Your boss discovers you won't take on extra work anymore. Your parent realizes you've chosen a different path than they planned. A friend sees you're not always strong, not always patient, not always available. The worst that happens, they adjust their image of you. They see you more accurately. And if they can't accept that, if they need the false version to feel secure, then what you had wasn't real connection anyway. The people who truly value you will adapt when you show them more of your truth. The ones who can't adapt were never seeing you in the first place. They were seeing their projection, their needs, their fantasy of who you should be for them. Right now, you might be thinking of specific people whose expectations have become cages. The parent who needs you to validate their choices by repeating them. The partner who loves the version of you that never has needs. The workplace that assumes you'll handle everything because you always have. What would it feel like to step back from those expectations? Not with cruelty, not with drama, but with quiet honesty about who you actually are versus who they've decided you should be. Some will adjust, some won't. But living your life inside their expectations is a cage you'll eventually suffocate in. Just like the palace cage the queen prepared for a creature who belonged to the mountains. The golden peacock lived free until the end of his days, admired by some, hunted by others, but owned by no one. This is what freedom actually looks like. Not hiding who you are, but refusing to let others' reactions to who you are determine how you live. Understanding this lifts one burden But there's another weight many carry daily, the words other people throw at you, the criticism that burrows into your chest and echoes for days. There's a teaching about what happens when someone stands in front of you pouring out rage, and how you can remain completely untouched while still hearing what's true. Bharadvaja was a man consumed by anger. He came from a respected Brahmin family, people who prided themselves on tradition, on maintaining the old ways. But recently something had happened that he experienced as betrayal. Members of his own family, his cousins, his nephew, even his younger brother, had started following the Buddha. They would leave the house early to hear this wandering teacher speak. They quoted his words at meals. They practiced sitting meditation instead of performing the rituals Bharadvaja considered sacred. It felt like theft, like this teacher had stolen his family from under him. The anger built over months. Every time he saw his brother return from hearing the Buddha teach, something twisted in Bharadvaja's chest. He tried arguing, tried reasoning, tried shaming them back to the old practices. Nothing worked. They would just smile with infuriating calmness and say things like, "Come hear him yourself. You'll understand." Finally, Bharadvaja decided to confront this teacher directly, not to listen, not to learn, to unleash everything he'd been holding. He wanted the Buddha to know what he'd done, how he'd disrupted families, how his teachings were destroying the foundations of their community. He found the Buddha sitting under a tree on the outskirts of a village. There were a few monks nearby, some lay people listening, but Bharadvaja didn't care about witnesses. He strode up directly, his body tight with accumulated rage, and began. The insults poured out. He attacked the Buddha's character, called him a fraud, a deceiver, a destroyer of families. He questioned the Buddha's teaching, his right to teach, his motives. He used language designed to wound, to provoke, to force some reaction. The words came faster and harsher as he went on. Each sentence, an attempt to pierce whatever calm this teacher claimed to possess. The Buddha didn't interrupt. He didn't defend himself. He didn't show anger or hurt, or even mild irritation. He simply sat, his eyes steady on Bharadvaja, his body completely still. Not the stillness of someone enduring attack, clenching against impact, but the stillness of someone watching weather pass across the sky. This only made Bharadvaja angrier. He wanted a fight. He wanted defense or counterattack, something he could push against, something that would justify the rage burning through him. But the Buddha just listened, his face expressing neither agreement nor offense, just clear attention. Finally, Bharadvaja exhausted himself. The words ran out. The anger was still there, but it had nowhere left to go. He stood there breathing hard, waiting for response, for retaliation, for something. The Buddha let the silence settle. Then he spoke, his voice gentle, almost curious. "Brahmin, when visitors come to your home, do you offer them food?" Bharadvaja blinked. This wasn't what he expected. What? Yes, of course. That's proper hospitality. And if they refuse the food you offer, the Buddha continued, if they say they're not hungry, or they've already eaten, to whom does that food belong? Bharadvaja frowned, confused about where this was going. Well, it belongs to me. It remains mine. The Buddha nodded slowly. In the same way, Brahmin, the abuse you have offered me, the insults, the harsh words, the accusations, I do not accept them. They remain with you. Something cracked open in Bharadvaja's chest. He had come here carrying poison, intending to make the Buddha drink it. He had hurled every painful thing he could think of, expecting them to land, to wound, to force some reaction that would prove this teacher was just another man who could be hurt. But the Buddha had simply not taken it. The poison was still there, but Bharadvaja was the one holding it. The Buddha had never reached out to grab it. For the first time, Bharadvaja saw his own behavior clearly. He saw himself standing there clutching rage, trying to force someone else to carry it. He saw how the Buddha's refusal to accept the insults hadn't been weakness or avoidance. It had been clarity, a simple understanding that other people's words only have the power you give them by accepting them as true. The anger didn't disappear instantly, but something shifted underneath it. Bharadvaja realized he had been carrying this poison for months, feeding it, strengthening it, waiting for the moment he could force someone else to swallow it. And that person had simply declined, had remained himself, untouched, while Bharadvaja stood there coated in his own bitterness. How do you do that? Bharadvaja asked, his voice smaller now. How do you just not take it? The Buddha gestured for him to sit. Bharadvaja, surprisingly, did. When someone speaks to you with anger, the Buddha said, their words are coming from their own pain, their own fear, their own confusion. These words might be about you. They might use your name, refer to your actions, but they're not actually about you. They're about what's happening inside the speaker. He continued, you came here angry about your family following my teaching, but was your anger really about me? Or was it about your fear that you're losing connection with people you love? Your uncertainty about whether the traditions you've built your life on are enough? Your pain at feeling left behind? Bharadvaja felt something sting behind his eyes. This was closer to truth than he wanted to admit. The insults you spoke, the Buddha said gently, they told me more about your suffering than about any flaw in me. And when I understand that, when I see the pain driving the words, I don't need to defend against them. I can simply see them for what they are, your pain trying to find somewhere to go. Bharadvaja sat in silence. The Buddha wasn't asking him to apologize, wasn't demanding he take back what he'd said, was simply offering him this understanding. Words are only gifts if you accept them. Insults are only wounds if you take them in. Over the following days, Bharadvaja returned to hear the Buddha teach. not because he'd been convinced by argument, but because the Buddha's non-reactivity had created space for something new. When someone doesn't fight you, doesn't match your aggression, doesn't defend or justify, you're forced to see yourself more clearly. Your own anger becomes visible because there's no one else's anger to blame it on. Eventually, Bharadvaja asked to become a student, not because the Buddha had defeated him, but because he recognized in that first encounter something he wanted to learn: how to remain yourself when others are throwing poison, how to see clearly when everything around you is chaos, how to not accept what doesn't belong to you. This teaching lives in every moment someone criticizes you. Think about what happens when someone insults you, questions your choices, attacks your character. Maybe it's a comment on social media from a stranger. Maybe it's your parents' disapproval of how you live. Maybe it's a colleague's cutting remark in a meeting. The words land, and immediately your mind starts working with them. Are they right? Is there truth in what they said? What did I do to deserve this? How can I prove them wrong? What should I have said back? These questions loop for hours, sometimes days. You replay the moment. You construct better responses. You imagine confrontations where you finally make them understand. This is acceptance. You took the gift. You're holding it now, examining it, arguing with it, letting it define your evening and disturb your sleep. Not accepting looks different. It doesn't mean pretending you didn't hear. It doesn't mean suppressing hurt. It means recognizing that their words are coming from their internal state, not from objective truth about you. When someone criticizes you harshly, ask yourself, is this about me or is this about them? Are they describing reality or are they projecting their own pain, their own fear, their own unmet needs? Most of the time, it's projection. The parent who criticizes your life choices is often expressing their own regret about roads not taken. The colleague who questions your competence is frequently revealing their own insecurity. The stranger online who attacks your appearance is telling you about their relationship with their own body, not yours. This doesn't mean all criticism is invalid. Sometimes feedback is accurate and useful, but you can tell the difference. Useful feedback is specific, offered with genuine care, focused on behavior rather than character, and delivered in a way that makes change possible. Projection is vague, hostile, attacks your fundamental worth, and leaves you nowhere to go except feel bad. When you recognize projection, you can decline to accept it. This doesn't require confrontation. You don't need to explain to the person why their words don't apply. You just internally note, this is about them, not about me. And then you let it go. Not by forcing yourself to forget, but by choosing not to give it space in your mind, not to let it nest there and build stories. The Buddha could do this completely. Years of practice had trained his mind to the point where insults literally didn't disturb his inner peace. You're probably not there yet. Neither am I. But it's a practice, not an instant achievement. The first time someone insults you after hearing this teaching, it will probably still sting. That's normal. The sting is the initial impact, the moment before you remember you have a choice. But then, and this is the practice, you can catch yourself before you grab the poison and swallow it. You feel the sting, acknowledge it existed, and then ask, do I want to carry this? Is this mine to hold? More often than not, the answer will be no. It's theirs. It came from their pain, their confusion, their unhealed wounds. You can witness that without taking it into yourself. Over time, this gets easier. The gap between hearing harsh words and remembering you don't have to accept them gets shorter. Eventually, you might reach moments where insults truly don't land at all. Not because you've built walls, but because you see so clearly where they're coming from that they never feel personal. This week, practice this with small things. Someone makes a passive-aggressive comment. Someone questions your judgment. Someone implies you're not enough in some way. Before you automatically take it in, before you start the loop of, are they right? What did I do wrong? How do I prove them wrong? Pause. Ask yourself, is this gift mine to accept? Most of the time, you'll realize it isn't. It's their anger, their fear, their projection, their inability to deal with their own feelings. They're offering you poison and hoping you'll drink it because they don't know what else to do with it. You can decline, politely, internally, without drama. Just, that's yours, not mine. And then watch what happens. The words might still echo for a moment, but they'll fade faster. You won't carry them for days. You won't let them define how you see yourself. You'll be like the Buddha under that tree, present, aware, but fundamentally undisturbed. Understanding that you can decline others' poison is liberating. But there's a companion skill that makes this complete, knowing when and how to show your own boundaries clearly, how to protect yourself without cruelty. There's a story about a creature who learnt the Buddha's teaching about non-harm, but misunderstood it dangerously, and what happened when the Buddha corrected that misunderstanding. Near a small village at the edge of the forest, there lived a serpent with a terrible reputation. He was large, fast, and aggressive. When anyone passed too close to his territory, farmers walking to their fields, children taking shortcuts through the grass, traders using the nearby path, he would strike. Some people were bitten seriously. A few had died. The entire village lived in fear of this creature. Parents warned their children constantly, stay away from the anthill near the forest edge. The serpent lives there. He will kill you. Farmers took long detours to avoid his territory. The path that had once been the quickest route between villages was abandoned completely. fear of the serpent shaped how everyone moved through their daily lives. The serpent himself didn't think much about this. He was simply defending his space. When something approached that felt threatening, he attacked. When something moved too quickly near his home, he struck. This was his nature, his instinct, the way he had always lived. Then one day, the Buddha was traveling through the area. Villagers rushed to warn him. "Don't go near the forest edge," they said urgently. "There's a deadly serpent there. He's killed people. Please, take the long route around." The Buddha thanked them for their concern, but continued walking toward the serpent's territory. The villagers watched from a distance, certain they were about to witness another death. When the Buddha approached the anthill, the serpent sensed the intrusion immediately. He emerged from his den, body coiled and ready, hood spread in warning. This was the posture that usually sent people running. But the Buddha didn't run. He stood calmly, his eyes meeting the serpent's without fear or aggression. The serpent moved closer, ready to strike. But something in the Buddha's presence stopped him. There was no threat in this person, no aggression to match, no fear to feed on, just steady, clear awareness. The Buddha spoke gently. "You've caused a great deal of suffering. Do you know how many people live in fear because of your violence? How many have been harmed? How many families have lost someone they loved?" The serpent had never thought about it this way. He had only thought about territory, about threat, about the instinct to defend. But now, seeing himself through the Buddha's words, something shifted. The Buddha continued, "Anger and violence create chains of suffering that spread far beyond the initial act. When you bite someone, you don't just harm them. You harm their family, their community, yourself. You create fear that poisons the whole area. Is this how you want to live?" The serpent felt something he had never felt before, remorse. Not shame exactly, but a clear seeing of the impact his actions had created. The Buddha wasn't punishing him, wasn't threatening him, was simply showing him reality. "What should I do?" the serpent asked. "Stop harming living beings," the Buddha said simply. "Abandon anger. When someone approaches, let them pass. You don't need to attack everything that comes near." The serpent took this teaching deeply into himself. He made a commitment right there. No more biting. No more violence. No more causing harm. He would practice non-violence completely. The Buddha left, and the serpent returned to his den changed. At first, the villagers didn't notice the difference. They still avoided the area, still warned their children, still took the long route. But gradually, word began to spread. Someone had walked past the anthill, and nothing happened. A child had wandered too close, and the serpent hadn't emerged. Farmers started using the old path again, cautiously at first. And then someone noticed something else. The serpent wasn't just peaceful, he was completely passive. He would lie in the sun near his den, and people could walk right past him. He didn't move, didn't react, didn't show any sign of self-protection. This is when things changed in a different way. A group of village boys noticed the serpent's new behavior. They saw he wasn't dangerous anymore. And being young, being bored, being the kind of thoughtless that young humans sometimes are, they decided to test it. They threw stones at him. The serpent didn't retaliate. They hit him with sticks. He didn't fight back. They grabbed him by the tail and flung him against rocks. He endured it in silence. The Buddha had said not to harm, not to bite, not to use violence. So the serpent interpreted this as, accept whatever comes. Never defend yourself. Endure all abuse without resistance. He believed this was what non-violence meant. The abuse continued over weeks and months. Not every day, but regularly enough. Different groups of boys would hear about the serpent that didn't fight back, and they would come to test it, to prove their bravery by tormenting a once dangerous creature. Adults who had feared him now felt emboldened to kick him out of their way when he was crossing a path. The serpent's body showed the damage. Scales were broken and scarred. He moved more slowly. He became thin because he was afraid to hunt, afraid that any movement might be interpreted as aggression. He was practicing what he thought the Buddha had taught: complete non-violence, total non-resistance. Months later, the Buddha returned to the area. He went to the anthill to see how the serpent was doing. What he found shocked him. The serpent was lying near his den, battered and weak. His body was covered in wounds. He looked like he might not survive much longer. When he saw the Buddha approaching, he tried to raise his head in greeting, but barely had the strength. "What happened to you?" the Buddha asked gently. The serpent explained everything: how he had stopped biting as instructed, how the villagers had noticed, how the abuse had started, how he had endured it all because he understood that harming others was wrong. "I did what you taught me," the serpent said weakly. "I haven't bitten anyone. I haven't caused harm. But this is what happened." The Buddha's response was immediate and clear. "I told you not to bite," he said. "I did not tell you not to hiss." The serpent looked confused. The Buddha knelt down closer. Non-violence doesn't mean accepting all violence against you. It means not harming others out of anger or cruelty. But you still need to protect yourself. You still need boundaries. You still need to show others that you cannot be abused. He continued, "When those boys approached you with stones, what would have happened if you had raised your hood, hissed loudly, showed your fangs? You wouldn't have bitten them, but they would have seen you had limits. They would have understood you were not prey, not a toy to torment. The hissing would have protected both you and them." "But isn't that aggression?" the serpent asked. "No," the Buddha said. "Aggression is attacking to harm. Hissing is communicating a boundary. It says, I will not attack you, but I also will not let you attack me. Come closer with respect, or stay back. That's not violence. That's clarity." The Buddha explained further, "When you bit people before, you were acting from anger You were harming them because they triggered your rage. That creates suffering. But when you hiss, when you show your boundaries without actually harming, you're teaching people how to interact with you safely. You're preventing harm to both of you. The serpent began to understand. So I can defend myself without biting. You must defend yourself without biting, the Buddha said. That's the practice. Not attacking, but also not becoming a victim. Finding the middle way between violence and passivity. From that day forward, the serpent practiced this new understanding. When someone approached carelessly or aggressively, he would raise his hood, show his presence, make it clear he had limits. He never bit, but he never again endured abuse silently. The village boys who came looking for easy prey found instead a creature who commanded respect without violence. They would approach, the serpent would hiss sharply, and they would back away. No one was harmed, but the boundary was clear. Over time, the serpent healed. His body recovered, his strength returned, and he lived the rest of his life embodying what the Buddha had taught, powerful but not violent, clear about his boundaries but not cruel, respected but not feared. This teaching is exactly what you need to understand right now. You've probably spent your life believing that being kind means being available, that being spiritual means being passive, that being good means letting people treat you however they want. The serpent made this exact mistake. He heard "don't harm" and interpreted it as "accept all harm." But that's not what non-violence means. Not in Buddhism, not in any wisdom tradition that understands human nature. Think about your own life. Where are you being silent when you should be hissing? Maybe your coworker constantly dumps extra work on you, and you accept it without comment because saying no feels mean. Maybe your family member criticizes every choice you make, and you sit there taking it because defending yourself seems aggressive. Maybe your partner speaks to you dismissively, and you don't object because you don't want to cause conflict. You're the serpent lying there wounded, believing that acceptance equals virtue. But it doesn't. It equals suffering that doesn't have to exist. The Buddha's teaching is clear: hiss. What does hissing look like in human life? It's not yelling. It's not attacking. It's not cruelty. It's clear communication of your boundaries. When your coworker tries to hand you extra work, "I can't take this on right now. My plate is full." That's hissing. No apology, no over-explanation, just clear boundary. When your family member criticizes your choices, "I've made my decision about this. I'm not going to discuss it further." That's hissing. Calm, firm, final. When your partner speaks dismissively, "That tone doesn't work for me. We can continue this conversation when you can speak to me with respect." That's hissing. You're showing your limit without attacking them. The key difference between hissing and biting. Biting is designed to harm. "You're such an inconsiderate person. You always do this." you never think about anyone else. That's biting. That's injecting venom. That creates wounds. Hissing is designed to protect. I need you to stop doing this. That's hissing. It's clear, it's firm, but it's not cruel. Most people are afraid to hiss because they've confused it with biting. They think any assertion of boundaries is aggression. So they stay silent, endure, accumulate wounds, and eventually either explode into actual biting or collapse into victimhood. The Buddha taught a third option: be the serpent who hisses. Show your presence. Make your limits known. Communicate clearly that you will not accept certain treatment. Do all of this without hatred, without desire to harm, but with absolute clarity about what you will and won't tolerate. Some people will respect your hiss immediately. They'll hear the boundary, adjust their behavior, and your relationship will actually improve because it's now built on honesty instead of your silent resentment. Others will test the boundary. They'll push to see if you really mean it. This is when you hiss louder, clearer, more firmly. Still not biting, still not cruel, but unmistakably serious. And some, a small number, will refuse to respect any boundary you set. These are the people you may need to distance yourself from entirely, not as punishment, not as revenge, but as protection. The serpent didn't have to stay near people who threw stones. Neither do you. What the Buddha taught the serpent applies directly to you. You have the right to exist safely in the world. You have the right to protect yourself from harm. You can do this without becoming the thing you're protecting yourself from. You can set boundaries without being cruel. You can say no without being hateful. You can show your limits without attacking. This is the middle way. Not violence, not passivity, but clear presence. Right now, identify one place where you need to hiss. Not bite, hiss. One relationship, one situation, one pattern where you've been lying there taking stones, believing that's what kindness requires. What would your hiss sound like? Not an attack, not a lecture, not a detailed explanation of why they're wrong. Just a clear statement of your boundary. Practice it. Say it out loud right now, even if no one's listening. Feel how it sits in your mouth, in your chest. Notice that you can be firm without being cruel. You can protect yourself without harming anyone. The serpent learned this and lived differently afterward. He was no longer dangerous, but he was also no longer vulnerable. He commanded respect not through fear, but through clear communication about his boundaries. You can live this way too, protected but not violent, kind but not passive, peaceful but absolutely clear about what you will accept and what you won't. Now you understand both pieces, how to not accept others' poison and how to show your boundaries without injecting your own. These two teachings work together as complete protection. One guards your inner peace, the other guards your outer safety. But there's a deeper pattern beneath all this, one about how you relate to the events of your life themselves, the circumstances you label good or bad. The question people ask most often is, when do I use which one? A family member criticizes your career choice at dinner. Do you stay silent or speak up? A co-worker makes a passive-aggressive comment in a meeting. Do you let it pass or address it? Your partner says something hurtful during an argument. Do you absorb it or set a boundary? The answer is almost always both. These teachings aren't either-or choices. They're layers of protection that work together. One guards your inner world, the other guards your outer space. And in most difficult situations, you need both operating simultaneously. Watch how they work together in real life. Your family member says, "You're wasting your potential. You could have been something important, but look at you now." Inside, the first teaching activates immediately. You recognize this is about their values, their definition of success, their regret about their own choices. It's not objective truth about you. You feel the initial sting, then decline to let it burrow deeper. That's their projection, not my reality. The poison is offered. You don't accept it. Outside, the second teaching determines your response. You speak calmly but clearly. "I'm not going to discuss my career choices with you anymore. If you can't respect my decisions, we'll talk about other things." You've set a boundary without injecting venom. You've hissed, not bitten. Both together. You're protected internally from their words becoming your self-doubt, and you're protected externally from this becoming a pattern that repeats every family gathering. The conversation moves on or ends, and you remain centered. A co-worker makes a passive-aggressive comment in a meeting. Something like, "Well, if everyone did their part on time like they're supposed to, we wouldn't have these issues." Everyone knows it's directed at you. Inside, first teaching, you don't absorb it as truth. You recognize passive aggression as their inability to communicate directly, their own discomfort with conflict. You don't spend the afternoon spiraling into, "Am I unreliable? Am I the problem? Do they all hate me?" Outside, second teaching. After the meeting, you speak to them directly. "If you have concerns about my work, please talk to me privately rather than making comments in meetings. I'm happy to discuss any actual issues." Clear boundary, no venom. Both shields. The comment doesn't wound you, and the pattern doesn't continue. Your partner says something during an argument that crosses a line, something deliberately hurtful about your appearance, your intelligence, your past. Inside, you recognize this is them lashing out from their own pain, saying something they know will hurt because they're hurt. It's not truth. It's a weapon they grabbed in desperation. You don't let it redefine how you see yourself. Outside, you stop the conversation immediately. "We're done talking right now. When you attack me personally, I'm not going to engage. We can continue when you can disagree without being cruel. You leave the room if needed. Both shields. Your self-worth remains intact, and you've shown clearly that this behavior ends the conversation. When you talk again, there's a better chance it will be productive because you didn't accept the poison and you showed your limit. Notice the pattern. The inner shield is immediate and automatic. It happens in your mind the moment words are spoken. The outer shield requires conscious action. It's what you say or do in response. Sometimes you'll use one more than the other, depending on the situation. Stranger online says something cruel about you. Inner shield only. You see it's their stuff. You don't internalize it. You move on. No outer response needed. They're not in your actual life. They get no boundary conversation. They get nothing. Boss regularly overloads you with work. Outer shield primarily. You might not care much what they think of you personally, so their words don't wound. But you absolutely need to set limits about the workload. I can take on A or B, but not both. Which is the priority? Close friend makes a hurtful comment. Both shields fully engaged. You care about this relationship, so you protect it with both internal non-acceptance of their bad moment, defining your whole friendship, and external clear communication that this isn't okay. Understanding when each shield is needed comes with practice. The general principle: use the inner shield always. Every time someone offers you poison, decline it internally. This is a constant practice, a way of relating to all criticism and hostility. Use the outer shield when there's a pattern, there's a relationship you want to maintain, but needs correction. There's ongoing access to you that's being abused, or silence would communicate acceptance. Don't use the outer shield when it's a one-time interaction with no future relationship. Engaging would escalate danger. Your energy is better spent elsewhere, or the person is completely unable to hear boundaries. Sometimes the best boundary is walking away entirely. Some people will test whether your shields are real. They'll insult you to see if you internalize it. When you don't react with self-doubt or defense, they might escalate, trying to find the words that will finally pierce you. This is when your inner shield gets stronger. Each failed attempt to wound you proves to yourself that their words aren't truth. They'll push against your stated boundaries to see if you'll enforce them. You said don't speak to you that way, and they do it again. This is when your outer shield must be consistent. You follow through. You end the conversation. You leave. You reduce contact. Your boundary must mean something, or it becomes just noise. The hardest moments are when you need both shields against someone you love. Your parent who can't stop criticizing. Your partner who's going through something difficult and taking it out on you. Your friend who's become increasingly toxic but you share history. This is when you remember, protecting yourself isn't betraying them. Not accepting their poison isn't abandoning them in their pain. Setting boundaries isn't being cruel. It's refusing to let love become an excuse for harm. You can say, "I love you, and I won't accept this treatment." Both things are true. I'm here for you, but not as your target. Sometimes your shields will save relationships rather than end them. When you stop internalizing their worst moments and stop tolerating their worst behaviors, you create space for them to see themselves more clearly. Like Bharadvaja seeing his own rage reflected in the Buddha's calm, people often need your non-reactivity and clear boundaries to recognize what they're actually doing. Other times, your shields will reveal that the relationship can't continue healthily. If someone requires you to accept their poison and tolerate their abuse to maintain connection, that's not relationship. It's hostage situation. Your shields give you the clarity to see this. Right now, think about where you need to strengthen your protection. Are you good at not internalizing, but terrible at setting boundaries? You float through insults unscathed, but you're exhausted by constant exposure to them. Practice your outer shield. Start small. Start with low-stakes situations, but start speaking your limits. Are you good at boundaries, but you internalize everything first? You can say, "Don't do that," but then you suffer internally, wondering if you're too sensitive, too difficult, too much. Practice declining the poison before it touches your sense of self. Most people need to develop one shield more than the other. Identify which one is weaker for you, and that's where you focus your practice this week. The Buddha taught both these skills because together they create freedom. Freedom from being wounded by others' words. Freedom from being trapped by others' behaviors. Freedom to remain yourself, peaceful but protected, kind but clear, open but not defenseless. You've learnt now how to handle difficult people, toxic words, and boundary violations. But life doesn't just bring difficult people. It brings difficult circumstances. Loss, failure, unexpected change, events you can't control and didn't choose. There's a teaching about someone who faced complete reversal of fortune and what he learned about meeting these moments without adding suffering to what's already difficult. In the kingdom of Mithila, there lived a man known simply as Kaccayana. His name was spoken with respect in every corner of the city. Merchants sought his advice on disputes. Farmers brought him their land quarrels. Even the king relied on his judgment when difficult decisions needed making. Kaccayana served as a royal advisor, but his reputation came from something deeper than his position. People trusted him because he saw clearly. When two parties came arguing, each certain they were right, he could find the truth underneath the emotion. When the king faced choices with no obvious answer, Kaccayana could illuminate consequences others hadn't considered. His insight seemed to cut through confusion like lamplight through darkness. He had built this life carefully over years. Started as a junior clerk in the palace, observing how power worked, how decisions got made, earned trust through consistency, advanced because people noticed his judgment was sound, his integrity unshakable. By the time he became a royal advisor, he had a house with a garden where he grew herbs, enough income to support his family comfortably, and the genuine respect of the community. His wife would tease him sometimes about bringing work home. He'd sit in their garden after dinner, still turning over some complex problem in his mind, and she'd bring him tea and remind him that not everything could be solved before morning. His children had grown up watching him serve the kingdom, learning from his example what it meant to live with purpose. By any measure, his life was good, stable, secure, built on a foundation that seemed unshakable. Then, one morning, everything shattered. Palace guards arrived at his door before dawn. They pushed past his startled wife, grabbed him roughly, bound his hands behind his back. "You're under arrest for theft from the royal treasury," the captain announced. Kachayana's mind spun trying to make sense of words that made no sense. What? There must be some mistake. I've never even entered the treasury. But they weren't listening. They dragged him through the streets as neighbors watched in shock as his wife stood in the doorway with tears streaming down her face. At the palace, he demanded to see the king, to explain, to understand the accusation. But he was told the king had already seen the evidence and made his decision. A valuable ceremonial vessel had disappeared from the treasury weeks ago. Someone claimed they saw Kachayana near the treasury that day. Another person, someone who had always resented Kachayana's influence, had fabricated documents suggesting Kachayana had gambling debts, financial pressure, motives for theft. The king, trusting these reports and not investigating further, had made his judgment. His trusted advisor had betrayed him. There would be no trial, no chance to present defense, no opportunity to expose the lies. Kachayana was thrown into prison. The cell was everything you'd imagine from the worst nightmares of confinement. Dark except for thin light that crept through a gap near the ceiling at midday. The floor was cold stone, damp and filthy with things he didn't want to identify. The air reeked of human waste and unwashed bodies and desperation. Other prisoners filled nearby cells, some moaning continuously, some shouting at guards who ignored them, some sitting in defeated silence that was somehow worse than the moaning. Kachayana sat on the stone floor and tried to understand what had happened. Yesterday morning he had been in the palace, advising the king on tax policy, eating breakfast with his family, planning his daughter's upcoming wedding. Now he was here, imprisoned, his reputation destroyed, his family shamed, his future apparently ended. He could feel panic rising in his chest like floodwater. His mind wanted to spiral. This is impossible. I've done nothing wrong. My life is ruined. My wife, my children, what will happen to them when everyone believes I'm a thief? I'll die here. Everything I built over decades is gone in a single morning. But Kachayana had spent years training his mind to see clearly, to distinguish reality from the stories we tell about reality. He took a breath and observed what was actually true in this moment. Yesterday I was free. Today I am imprisoned. The conditions of my life have changed. Not, this is terrible. Not, "This is the end of everything." Not, "I don't deserve this." Just, "Conditions have changed." He noticed fear arising, the physical sensation of it tightening his throat, making his heart race. He noticed anger at the injustice, hot and sharp in his chest. He noticed grief for what he'd lost, heavy and aching. But he didn't feed these feelings with catastrophic stories about the future. He didn't spend hours imagining worst-case scenarios. He simply sat with what was actually happening in this moment, which was sitting on cold stone, breathing stale air, feeling afraid. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Guards brought thin gruel once a day, sometimes with a piece of stale bread. There was a bucket in the corner for waste that was emptied irregularly. Rats moved through the cells at night. Prisoners around him deteriorated in different ways, some into raving madness, some into bitter rage that poisoned every word they spoke, some into hollow-eyed resignation where they stopped speaking at all. Kachayana maintained the same practice, observing conditions without the story that these conditions defined his entire existence or predicted his entire future. When despair arose, and it did, especially in the darkest hours before dawn, he watched it like weather moving through, acknowledged it. This is the mind in despair. Didn't fight it, didn't feed it, just witnessed it until it passed. When he caught himself clinging to memories of his former life, his garden, his family, his work, he gently released them. Those were past conditions. These are present conditions. Both are temporary. When he imagined the future, dying here, never seeing his family again, being forgotten, he returned to the only moment that actually existed, this one, this breath, this sensation of cold stone, this actual moment, rather than the imagined terrible future. His body weakened from poor food and lack of movement. His hair grew long and matted. His clothes became rags. His skin grew pale from months without sunlight. But his mind remained clear, not untouched by difficulty, not pretending this wasn't hard, but not drowning in stories about how terrible it all was, or how unfair, or how permanent. Meanwhile, outside the prison walls, the kingdom began experiencing problems. Disputes that Kachayana used to settle skillfully now escalated. Two farmers arguing over water rights couldn't find resolution, and the conflict spread until one farmer's son killed the other farmer in rage. A merchant disagreement that Kachayana would have resolved fairly in an afternoon led to a trade boycott that lasted months and hurt the city's economy. The king's other advisors proved themselves either incompetent, missing obvious consequences of their counsel, or corrupt, giving advice that served their own interests rather than the kingdom's good. The king started to notice the absence. Decisions he made, without Kachayana's insight, created consequences he hadn't foreseen. Problems multiplied. Tax policies he'd implemented on bad advice were making farmers abandon their land. Trade agreements he'd signed were favoring foreign merchants over his own people. He began, quietly, to doubt the accusations that had seemed so convincing 6 months ago. Then one day, palace guards caught a servant trying to sell a ceremonial vessel at the market, the very vessel that had gone missing. Under questioning, the servant confessed everything. He had stolen it. He had been helped by others in the palace who wanted Kachayana's position, who resented his influence with the king. They had fabricated the evidence, bribed the witnesses, constructed the entire frame carefully. The truth emerged completely. Kachayana had been innocent all along. The king felt something collapse in his chest. He had imprisoned an innocent man, his most trusted advisor, a man who had served him faithfully for years. He had accepted lies without investigation because he had been too busy, too trusting of the wrong people, too quick to judge. He went immediately to the prison himself, something kings rarely did. When the cell door opened and light flooded in, Kachayana looked up to see the king standing there, his face twisted with shame and regret. "I have wronged you terribly," the king said, his voice breaking. "I believed lies. I didn't question. I didn't investigate. I imprisoned an innocent man who served me faithfully for years. Please, Kachayana, forgive me." The king expected to see a broken man, someone embittered by months of unjust suffering, someone radiating rage, demanding revenge, permanently scarred by the experience. Instead, he saw the same clear-eyed presence he had always known. Kachayana's body showed the effects of imprisonment, much thinner, weaker, marked by obvious hardship. But his eyes held the same steady awareness. No resentment twisted his face. No bitterness hardened his voice when he spoke. "The conditions have changed," Kachayana said simply. "Yesterday I was imprisoned. Today I am released. That is what is happening now." The king helped him stand on unsteady legs, brought him to the palace, arranged for physicians and baths, and fresh clothing and food. As Kachayana recovered his physical strength over the following days, the king watched in amazement. This man had been imprisoned unjustly for 6 months, and yet he bore no grudge. He had lost everything, and yet remained fundamentally himself. He had suffered deeply, and yet emerged with his clarity intact, perhaps even deepened. The king made a decision. "I want you as my chief minister," he said, "the highest position in the kingdom after my own. You will have authority over all other advisors, over the treasury, over the courts. You will live in comfort and honor greater than you had before. This is not payment for what I took from you. Nothing could pay that debt. But I need your wisdom now more than I ever have." Kachayana accepted the position with the same equanimity he had accepted imprisonment. "Yesterday I was in prison. Today I am chief minister. The conditions have changed again. Not, finally, justice has been served. Not, this is what I deserved all along. not see. Everything worked out for the best in the end. Just conditions have changed. He served as chief minister with the same integrity and wisdom he had shown before his imprisonment. He settled disputes fairly. He gave counsel that benefited the kingdom rather than his own power. But he held his new position lightly, knowing from lived experience that circumstances could shift at any moment, that what seemed solid could dissolve overnight, that security was always temporary. What his time in prison had clarified completely was this: the imprisonment wasn't inherently bad, and the promotion wasn't inherently good. They were both just changing conditions. Circumstances arising from complex causes, flowing into new circumstances, impossible to label as ultimately fortunate or unfortunate, because the story was never finished. The consequences kept unfolding. This is what you do every day with your own life. Something happens you didn't choose. A job loss, a diagnosis, a relationship ending, a plan falling apart. Immediately you label it disaster, the worst thing, and then you suffer twice. Once from the actual difficulty of the situation, and again from the story you tell about how terrible it is, how it proves your life is cursed, how you'll never recover. Something goes well, a promotion, good news, a stroke of luck. Immediately you label it good. Finally things are working out. Finally I'm safe. And then you suffer from clinging, from terror that this good thing will end, from building your whole sense of security on conditions that will definitely change. Kachayana's teaching is available right now. What if you met what comes without the labels? Not with indifference, not pretending difficulty isn't difficult, but without the story that this circumstance defines whether your life is fundamentally blessed or cursed. Traffic makes you late. Conditions have changed from what you planned. Can you notice frustration without the story that your whole day is ruined? That this always happens to you? That nothing ever goes right? You receive unexpected good news. Conditions have shifted pleasantly. Can you appreciate it without clinging desperately? Without believing you've finally arrived at permanent happiness that must be protected at all costs? This is equanimity. Meeting what comes, pleasant or unpleasant, wanted or unwanted, with balanced awareness. Responding skillfully to circumstances, without adding the suffering of judgment about whether these circumstances prove life is for you or against you. Kachayana sat in prison and remained himself. He served as chief minister and remained himself. The circumstances changed completely. He stayed steady. This steadiness is possible for you too, whatever is happening right now in your life. Not by pretending everything is fine, but by meeting what is without the exhausting weight of labeling it as the best or worst thing ever. Just conditions, changing as they always do. But meeting changing conditions with equanimity requires something foundational, a mind that can actually stay present instead of scattering in 1,000 directions. There's a story about a young man who built this capacity through discipline. and what happened when he discovered that a focused mind changes everything. Sadhana was nobody special, the son of a modest family in a village where most young men became farmers or traders, like their fathers. But from childhood, Sadhana had wanted something different. He wanted to learn, not just practical skills for making a living, but real knowledge, the sacred texts, philosophy, the workings of language and logic. When he was old enough, he traveled to a monastery where scholars gathered to study. The place hummed with learning. Senior monks who had memorized entire collections of teachings, visiting scholars who debated fine points of doctrine, young students from wealthy families who could afford years of study. Sadhana arrived with almost nothing. No family connections, no impressive background, and something that marked him immediately as different. He couldn't read or write well. He had learnt some basics in his village, but not enough for serious scholarship. While other students could read texts fluently, Sadhana struggled with every line. While they wrote elegant summaries of their learning, his hand formed clumsy characters. The senior monks assessed him when he arrived. They saw his limitations and gave him work that matched, helping in the kitchen, sweeping halls, maintaining the grounds. He could listen to teachings when his work was done, but he wasn't expected to become a real scholar. How could he, when he lacked the basic tools? The other students noticed him, of course. They saw this village boy struggling to read texts they had mastered as children. They heard him repeating simple passages over and over, trying to commit them to memory, since reading was so difficult. Some felt pity, others felt superiority. A few made jokes at his expense when the monks weren't listening. But Sadhana understood something the others didn't yet. He couldn't control how quickly he learned to read. He couldn't change the education he hadn't received as a child. But he could control one thing: whether his mind was scattered or focused. He created a routine and never broke it. Every morning he rose before dawn, not when he felt like it, not when the mood struck him, but every single morning at the same time. He would sit in meditation for an hour while the monastery was still dark and quiet. Just sitting, watching his breath, training his attention to stay with one thing instead of jumping to the next thought, the next worry, the next distraction. Then he would do his assigned work, sweeping, cooking, whatever was needed. But he did it with full attention, not thinking about what he'd study later, not rehearsing conversations or planning his day, just sweeping, fully present to the motion of the broom, the sound of bristles on stone. After his work, he would study. The same time every day. He would choose one short text and work with it until he understood it completely, not jumping to the next thing when he got bored or frustrated, not comparing himself to students who were reading 10 times as much. Just this text, this passage, this line, until it was clear. In the evening, another hour of meditation. Same time, same place, same practice of bringing his wandering attention back to his breath, again and again, building the muscle of focus. The other students noticed this routine. Some found it amusing. "Why do you waste time sitting when you have so much to learn?" they'd ask. "You can barely read a simple text, and you spend 2 hours a day doing nothing." Others found it frustrating when they tried to engage him in social time. "Come drink tea with us, debate philosophy, enjoy the evening." But Sadhina would decline. "I have my evening practice." They thought he was being rigid, missing the joy of spontaneity, turning learning into joyless discipline. Some of the senior monks noticed too, and questioned his approach. "Scholarship requires flexibility," one told him. "You can't force learning to happen on a schedule. You need to follow inspiration. Study when the mind is ready, not impose this mechanical routine." But Sadhina continued, not because he was stubborn or defensive, simply because he could feel something changing in his mind. In the beginning, meditation was torture. He would sit down and within seconds his mind was everywhere except his breath, planning the day, remembering embarrassments, imagining futures, rehearsing conversations. The hour felt like 10 hours. But he kept sitting, kept noticing when attention wandered, kept gently bringing it back, not fighting, not forcing, just returning. Like training a puppy to stay, you don't beat it when it wanders, you just keep calling it back, patiently, consistently. After months, something shifted. The hour of meditation stopped feeling like torture. His mind still wandered, but it wandered less frantically. The returns to focus came more easily, and he began to notice the effects bleeding into the rest of his day. When he sat down to study a difficult text, he could stay with it longer before his attention scattered. When he was memorizing a passage, he could hold multiple lines in his mind instead of losing the beginning while learning the end. When senior monks were teaching and other students were fidgeting or whispering or losing the thread, Sadhina could follow the entire argument without his mind wandering. His reading improved, not because reading itself became easier, but because he could focus on each word without rushing, without anxiety about how slow he was, without his mind jumping ahead or back. He would read one line with complete attention, understand it fully, then move to the next. Other students read faster but retained less. They skimmed, their minds half present, thinking about other things while their eyes moved across the page. Sadhina read slowly, but what he read stayed. It settled into his understanding like water soaking into soil rather than running off the surface. After a year, something remarkable began happening. A teacher would present a complex teaching, and while other students asked for clarification, needed it repeated, wanted it broken down into simpler pieces, Sadhina understood it immediately. Not because he was smarter, but because his mind was there, fully present, receiving the teaching without the static of distraction. He would hear a text once and remember it, not through some trick or special technique, but because his mind wasn't scattered across 12 thoughts while trying to listen. He was simply there, receiving and so the information landed cleanly. His understanding of complex ideas deepened rapidly, not from reading more texts than others, but from reading each text with such focused attention that he could see connections, implications, nuances that scattered reading missed. The students who had mocked his rigid routine began to notice. The village boy, who couldn't read well, was now grasping teachings faster than they were. The one who wasted time meditating was now demonstrating sharper comprehension than students who spent every waking hour with texts. Some asked him how he did it. He tried to explain. The mind is like a lamp. If it's flickering constantly, moving in the wind, you can't see clearly by its light. But if you shelter it, let it burn steady, it illuminates everything. They heard the words, but most didn't understand. They thought learning was about accumulating information, reading more texts, debating more topics. Sadhina had discovered it was about attention. A focused mind could learn more from one text than a scattered mind could learn from 100. Within a few years, Sadhina's understanding surpassed most of his teachers. Not because he had memorized more texts or could recite longer passages, but because he saw clearly. His focused mind could penetrate to the heart of complex questions. He could hold multiple perspectives simultaneously and see how they related. He could distinguish subtle differences that others missed. He became known as a scholar of exceptional wisdom. People came to him with questions. Other monks sought his insight. And always, he maintained the routine that had built this capacity, rising before dawn, meditating, working with full presence, studying with complete focus, meditating again in the evening. The routine wasn't punishment. It wasn't joyless discipline imposed from outside. It was the structure that allowed his mind to develop the way a trellis allows a vine to grow upward, instead of sprawling chaotically. You live in Sadhina's world right now. Your mind scatters across a dozen things simultaneously. You're reading this while part of your mind is planning tomorrow, reviewing yesterday, wondering what you should be doing instead. You sit down to focus on work, and within 2 minutes, you're checking your phone. You try to have a conversation, and you're only half present, part of you already composing your response, or thinking about something else entirely. This isn't moral failure. It's not weakness. It's what minds do when they haven't been trained. A puppy doesn't stay in one place naturally. Water doesn't flow in a straight line naturally. And attention doesn't remain focused naturally. It has to be trained. But here's what modern culture gets wrong. It tells you to try harder, focus more, push through, force yourself to concentrate. And when that doesn't work, you conclude something's wrong with you. Sadhina's approach was opposite. He didn't force concentration. He created conditions where concentration could develop naturally. The morning meditation wasn't about achieving perfect focus. It was about practicing the return, noticing when attention wandered and gently bringing it back. Doing that 1,000 times, 10,000 times, until the return became smooth, natural, easy. The routine wasn't about rigidity. It was about removing the exhausting work of deciding when to practice, what to do, whether you feel like it. Same time, same practice, every day. The decision is already made. You just show up. The full attention to simple tasks. Sweeping, cooking, wasn't wasted time. It was practice for bringing full attention to complex tasks later. If you can't focus on sweeping a floor, how will you focus on difficult learning? Think about what you're trying to learn or accomplish right now. Maybe you want to understand something complex. Maybe you're trying to develop a skill. Maybe you're working on a project that requires sustained attention. You probably approach it by trying to force your scattered mind to focus. Sitting down with all your distractions still available, your mind still in its usual chaotic state, and attempting to concentrate through sheer willpower. It doesn't work, or it works for brief bursts before exhaustion sets in. Sadhana's way. Train the mind first. Build the capacity for focus through simple, consistent practice. Then bring that trained attention to what you want to learn. You don't need hours of meditation. Start with 10 minutes in the morning. Same time, every day. Not when you feel inspired or when you have time. Same time, just sitting, following your breath, noticing when attention wanders, bringing it back. That's the whole practice. Notice the difference between forcing and training. Forcing is, I will not let my mind wander. I will concentrate. I must focus. Training is, my mind wandered. That's okay. I'm bringing it back. Again and again. Each return is practice. This builds concentration, the way lifting weights builds strength. You don't lift weights by trying really hard to be strong. You lift them consistently. Rest, repeat, and strength develops naturally as a result. You don't build focus by trying really hard to concentrate. You practice returning attention consistently, and focus develops naturally as a result. Then apply it to daily tasks. When you're washing dishes, just wash dishes. When you're walking, just walk. Not as some spiritual achievement, but as practice for being fully present. Each moment of full attention is training. Over weeks and months, you'll notice what Sadhana noticed. Tasks that required enormous effort become easier. Learning that felt impossible becomes manageable. Not because the tasks got easier, but because your mind got steadier. The flame of attention that used to flicker in every breeze now burns steady. And by that steady light, you can see clearly what scattered attention can never perceive. What would this look like for you? Not some ideal version where you meditate for hours. Just you, as you are, creating one small routine that trains attention. 10 minutes in the morning, full presence during one daily task. That's enough to start. The discipline isn't punishment. It's the kindness of creating conditions where your mind can finally settle, finally focus, finally develop the capacity you've wanted all along. But steady focus alone won't carry you through life's genuine crises. There are moments when everything falls apart, when disaster strikes, when you're drowning and steady breathing won't save you. For those moments, you need a different kind of teaching, one about effort that doesn't break you, about swimming when the ship goes down. Prince Mahajanaka had lost everything before he was old enough to understand what losing meant. His father, King Arita Janaka, was killed in battle when Mahajanaka was still a child. His uncle seized the throne. His mother fled the palace in the middle of the night, carrying her infant son, running for their lives. They ended up in a distant city where no one knew who they were. The queen became just another woman trying to survive. She worked, saved what she could, and raised her son with one truth repeated constantly: you are the rightful king of Mithila. Never forget what was taken from you. One day, you will reclaim it. Mahajanaka grew up with this knowledge burning in him. His kingdom existed, but he couldn't reach it. His throne waited, but someone else sat on it. His birthright was real, but he had no army, no wealth, no power to claim it. When he came of age, he made a plan. He would travel to distant lands and earn wealth as a merchant. He would build resources, gather supporters, return strong enough to challenge his uncle, and take back what belonged to him. It was a long path, but it was the only path he could see. His mother gave him what little money she had saved over years. He used it to buy a share in a merchant ship traveling to trade in foreign ports. The ship was large and well made, captained by an experienced sailor. Other merchants were aboard with their goods. The voyage would take months, but if successful, his investment would multiply many times over. The first weeks at sea were uneventful. Good winds, calm waters, the crew working efficiently. Mahajanaka spent his time on deck, watching the endless ocean, imagining the future where he returned to Mithila, not as a refugee's son, but as a wealthy man, capable of reclaiming his throne. Then one morning, the sky changed. The captain noticed it first. The particular color of clouds on the horizon, the way the wind shifted. He began shouting orders. Crew scrambled to secure cargo, to adjust sails. Passengers were told to go below deck and hold on to something fixed. The storm hit like a wall of rage. Waves taller than buildings smashed into the ship. Rain so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Wind that screamed and tore at everything. The ship rose on massive swells and crashed down into troughs. Timbers groaning, water pouring through gaps in the hull. Mahajanaka clung to a beam below deck as the world became chaos. Other passengers were screaming, praying, weeping. The cargo broke loose and slammed around the hold. Water was rising. He could hear the captain shouting above, but couldn't make out words over the storm's roar. Then came the sound he would never forget, a massive crack as the ship's spine broke. The vessel was splitting apart. Water flooded in faster. People were clawing toward the stairs, pushing, desperate to get above deck. Mahayanaka fought his way up through the surge. On deck, complete disaster. The ship was breaking into pieces. Crew members were being swept overboard. Other passengers clung to masts, to railings, to anything, but the ship was going down and taking them with it. People were grabbing floating debris, trying to use broken planks as flotation. Most were screaming for help, as if help could come in the middle of the ocean during a storm. Some were already giving up, letting go, sinking. The captain disappeared under a wave and didn't resurface. Mahajanaka saw all of this in fragments between walls of water. He saw people drowning. He saw the ship's final pieces slipping under. He saw nothing but ocean in every direction. And in that moment of complete disaster, something became absolutely clear. No one was coming to save him. No rescue ship. No friendly shore. No miracle. If he was going to survive, it would be because he didn't stop trying. He started swimming. Not toward anything. There was nothing to swim toward. Just swimming to not drown. The storm was still raging. Waves lifted him and threw him down. Rain battered his head. He swallowed water, coughed it out, kept moving his arms and legs. He could hear other survivors around him at first, their cries for help, their desperate prayers. But one by one, the voices stopped. People grabbed onto floating debris and clung there, using all their energy to hold on, until exhaustion made them let go and sink. Or they panicked, thrashing wildly until they exhausted themselves and went under. Or they simply gave up, deciding drowning was better than this endless struggle. Mahajanaka kept swimming, not because he had hope, not because he could see land, but because stopping meant dying, and something in him refused to choose death. Eventually the storm passed. The sky cleared. The ocean calmed to rolling swells. And Mahajanaka was alone. Completely alone in the middle of the ocean. No ship. No other survivors visible. No land in any direction. Just endless water and endless sky. He kept swimming. His body wanted to quit. Every muscle screamed. His arms felt like dead weight he was forcing to move. His legs cramped. The salt water had rubbed his skin raw. His lips were cracked and bleeding. His throat burned with thirst despite being surrounded by water. But he had learned something in those first moments of the shipwreck. Effort was his only refuge. Not hope of rescue. Not prayer for miracles. Not wishful thinking that the situation would magically improve. Just the decision to keep swimming as long as breath remained. He swam through the day. The sun burned his face and neck. He swam through the night. Darkness complete except for stars. He swam through the next day. Exhaustion becoming a state of being rather than a feeling. His mind began playing tricks. He saw ships on the horizon that weren't there. He saw islands that were just clouds. He heard voices calling his name from empty water. But he didn't stop moving. The effort was steady, not frantic. He wasn't thrashing wildly, burning energy in panic. He was swimming the way you'd walk a long distance, measured, sustainable, one stroke after another. He worked with the water instead of fighting it. When a swell lifted him, he rode it. When it dropped him, he adjusted and kept the rhythm going. This was effort without the story about the effort. He wasn't thinking, "I'm so strong. I'm going to survive this. I'm special." He wasn't thinking, "This is impossible. I'm going to die. Why bother?" He was just swimming, present with each stroke, each breath, the actual physical reality of moving through water. On the 7th day, or maybe the 8th, he had lost count. Something changed. The water around him began to glow faintly. He thought it was another hallucination at first, but then a figure emerged from beneath the surface. A woman, but not quite human, too radiant, too otherworldly. She was Manimekala, guardian of the ocean. She had been watching him. She had seen the ship go down and all the passengers perish. She had seen Mahajanaka alone in the vast ocean, swimming day and night without ceasing. His effort, his refusal to surrender, had moved her. "Why do you keep swimming?" she asked. "There is no land for hundreds of miles. You cannot possibly survive. Why not let go, rest, accept what's coming?" Mahajanaka, barely able to speak through cracked lips, answered, "Effort is the only refuge I have. I cannot control the ocean. I cannot make land appear, but I can choose to keep trying, as long as breath remains. If I die swimming, but I will not choose to stop." Manimekala understood. This wasn't desperate hope or delusion. This was pure effort, the human capacity to continue striving, even when outcome is uncertain, to choose action over despair. She lifted him from the water gently. She carried him through the air across the vast ocean, across mountains and forests, until they reached the kingdom of Mithila. She set him down on dry land near the city. Mahajanaka collapsed on the ground, his body finally able to stop. He had survived, not through luck, not through being special, but through refusing to stop trying, even when trying seemed pointless. Over the following weeks, as his body recovered, the story of his survival spread. The prince, who had been lost years ago, had returned. The people remembered his father. They were tired of his uncle's corrupt rule. Support gathered. His uncle, facing a rebellion he couldn't suppress, fled rather than fight. Mahajanaka reclaimed his throne without bloodshed. The kingdom he had lost as an infant was his again. Everything he had worked toward, everything his mother had promised, had come to pass. He ruled well. He was fair, wise, remembered his years of hardship, and didn't become the kind of king who forgets what suffering feels like. The kingdom prospered. He married. He had everything a man could want by worldly measure. But something had changed in those days in the ocean. He had learned what effort truly was, not striving for gain, not working toward reward, but the pure practice of continuing, regardless of outcome. He had learned that all external circumstances are uncertain, that ships sink, that kingdoms fall, that nothing you build is permanent. And he had tasted something in that swimming, in that pure effort, without guarantee, that felt more real than his throne. Years later, at the height of his power and success, Mahajanaka made a decision that shocked his court. He renounced the throne. He gave up his kingdom, his wealth, his power. He became a wandering seeker, applying the same steady effort he had used to swim through the ocean to the practice of meditation and insight. Because he understood now, the effort that had saved his life in the ocean was the same effort needed for liberation from suffering itself. Steady, persistent, not dependent on quick results or guaranteed outcomes. Swimming not toward a visible shore, but because swimming is what you do when you're in the ocean. Practicing not to achieve enlightenment by next Tuesday, but because practice is the only refuge you have. He practiced until he attained deep insight, and what he found at the end of that path made ruling a kingdom look like playing with toys. This teaching lives in your life right now. You're facing something difficult, maybe not a shipwreck, but your own version of drowning, a situation that feels impossible, a problem with no visible solution, a struggle that's gone on so long you're not sure you can continue, and you're exhausted from trying to control outcomes. You keep asking, when will this get better? How much longer do I have to do this? Where's the rescue? Where's the guarantee that my effort will pay off? Mahajanaka's teaching is this: effort itself is the refuge, not the outcome of effort, not the reward you hope for, just the steady continuation of skillful action, regardless of whether rescue appears. You keep showing up to the difficult job while looking for a better one. You keep practicing when progress is invisible. You keep caring for the sick person, even though recovery isn't guaranteed. You keep working on the problem, even though the solution hasn't appeared. Not because you're sure it will work out, not because you have hope that keeps you going, but because effort is what you can control when you can't control anything else. This isn't the toxic hustle harder message of burnout culture. Mahajanaka wasn't thrashing frantically in the water. He was swimming steadily, sustainably, working with the ocean instead of against it. Right effort means persistent but not frantic, sustained but not harsh, continuing but not desperate, like a long-distance runner who finds a pace they can maintain for miles rather than sprinting until collapse. It means knowing when to rest without quitting, when to adjust your approach without abandoning the path, when to work with circumstances instead of forcing against them. And here's the part that saved Mahajanaka. When you practice genuine effort, when you keep swimming with clarity and steadiness, supportive conditions often arise. Not because you earn divine intervention, but because sincere practice aligns with reality in ways scattered panic never does. The goddess didn't rescue the people who were thrashing and screaming. She rescued the one who was swimming, not as reward for being special, but because his effort showed something worth supporting. In your life, you can't control whether help arrives, but you can control whether you're swimming or drowning, whether you're practicing skillfully or collapsing into despair, whether you're working with reality or fighting it in panic. Right now, what's your ocean? Where are you drowning instead of swimming? Where have you stopped trying because you can't see the shore? What would steady effort look like? Not forced optimism, not grinding yourself into dust, just the sustainable practice of continuing skillfully, one stroke at a time, for as long as you have breath. And remember what Mahajanaka remembered when he renounced his kingdom. The highest effort isn't for worldly success. It's for liberation itself. The same steady practice that saves you from drowning can carry you all the way to freedom from suffering. The ship has already sunk. The only question is, will you keep swimming? But all this effort, all this practice, all this swimming, it can feel exhausting when you believe you're fundamentally broken and need fixing. There's one more teaching you need to hear, about someone who discovered that the mirror needs no polishing because it was never tarnished in the first place. Huineng was nobody, a poor woodcutter from the far south of China, barely literate, earning just enough by selling firewood to keep his widowed mother and himself alive. His days were simple and hard. Cut wood in the forest, bundle it, carry it to town, sell it, use the small coins to buy rice. Repeat. This was his life. This was all his life was expected to be. One day, delivering firewood to a customer's house, he heard something that stopped him. Someone inside was reciting a text. The words floated out through the open window. One should produce a mind that does not abide anywhere. Huineng didn't understand the words intellectually. He couldn't have explained what a mind that does not abide anywhere meant. But something in those words landed in him like a seed in prepared soil. He felt his chest crack open. He felt something he had never felt before, recognition of a truth he somehow already knew, but had never heard spoken. He stood there trembling, tears streaming down his face for reasons he couldn't name. When the recitation ended, he knocked on the door. An elderly man answered, looked at this rough woodcutter standing there crying, and waited. "What were you reading?" Huineng asked. "The Diamond Sutra," the man said. "Do you know it?" "No," Huineng said. "I can't read well. But those words, I need to hear more. Where can I learn this teaching?" The man studied him. Something in this woodcutter's response to a text he couldn't even read suggested depth the man rarely saw. "There's a monastery far north," he said. "The fifth patriarch Hongren teaches there. If you're serious, go find him." Huineng made arrangements for his mother's care and traveled north for weeks. A poor southern woodcutter, arriving at a famous monastery where scholars from across China came to study. He had no education, no connections, no money to offer, just the strange certainty that he needed to be there. When he was brought before the fifth patriarch, Hongren looked at this rough man and asked, "Where are you from, and what do you seek?" "I'm from the south," Huineng answered. "I come seeking to become a Buddha." Some of the monks nearby laughed quietly. This illiterate woodcutter seeking Buddhahood. Hongren's expression didn't change. "You're from the south," he said. "Southerners have no Buddha, nature." It was a test. Huineng responded immediately, "People may be from north or south, but Buddha, nature, has no north or south." Hongren saw it then. This man understood something directly. Not from books, not from study, but from immediate seeing. Dangerous to show this in front of other monks who had spent years accumulating knowledge. Dangerous for Huineng and dangerous for the teaching. "You seem to have some cleverness," Hongren said dismissively, "but you're uneducated. We can't have you as a formal student. There's work in the mill grinding rice. You can do that." So Huineng was assigned to the rice mill. Manual labor, the lowest work in the monastery. Day after day, he operated the heavy mill that pounded rice to remove the husks. His body was strong from years of cutting wood, so he could work the mill efficiently. But he was light, and the mill's lever would sometimes lift him off the ground, so he tied rocks around his waist for extra weight. Months passed this way. The educated monks studied texts, debated philosophy, practiced meditation in proper halls. Huineng pounded rice. He didn't complain. He didn't ask for different work. He pounded rice with the same attention he had once cut wood. Present, steady, complete. Then one day, Hongren made an announcement. He was growing old. He needed to choose a successor, someone to become the sixth patriarch and carry the teaching forward. "Write a verse," he told the monks. "Express your understanding of the mind. Whoever demonstrates true insight will receive the robe and bowl." The robe and bowl were symbols of transmission, passed from patriarch to patriarch. Receiving them meant inheriting the lineage. Every monk in the monastery understood what was at stake. But no one wrote a verse. They all assumed Shengxiu would be chosen. Shengxiu was the head monk, the most learned, the most respected. He had studied for decades. He could recite countless sutras from memory. He led meditation sessions. Everyone deferred to his understanding. Surely Hongren was just going through formality before naming him. Shengxiu himself felt the pressure. He spent days composing his verse, refining it, making sure it expressed the teaching correctly. Finally, late one night when no one would see him, he wrote on the wall of the monastery corridor, "The body is the Bodhi tree. The mind is like a bright mirror standing. Polish it diligently time and again. Do not let it gather dust. When monks saw the verse the next morning, they were awed. "This is profound," they said. "Shengzhu has captured the essence of practice." They praised the verse throughout the day. Hongren saw it and said nothing. The verse wasn't wrong. It expressed the gradual path accurately. Continuous cultivation, cleaning the mind of defilements, persistent practice over time. This was valid teaching, but it wasn't complete insight. Huineng, working in the rice mill, heard monks reciting the verse. He couldn't read it himself, so he asked someone to recite it for him. When he heard the words, he understood immediately what they expressed and what they missed. He asked a monk who could write to come to the wall that evening. "I'd like to add a verse," he said. The monk was surprised. This illiterate rice pounder wanted to compose a verse, but agreed. Huineng spoke, and the monk wrote on the wall, beside Shengshu's verse. "Bodhi originally has no tree. The bright mirror has no stand. Fundamentally, there is not a single thing. Where could dust collect?" The next morning, the monastery was in uproar. Some monks laughed. The rice pounder wrote nonsense trying to imitate Shengxiu. Others were disturbed. "This contradicts everything we've been taught." Some stood in front of the two verses, sensing something they couldn't quite name. When Hongren saw the verses together, he knew everything had changed. Shengxiu's verse said, "You have a mirror, mind. It gets dusty, defilements. You must polish it constantly, practice. This is the gradual path, the path of cultivation." It's not wrong. Most people need to walk this path. Huineng's verse said, "There is no mirror that can get dusty, because fundamentally, there is nothing. Mind is originally pure. Dust never actually touches it. This is seeing your original nature directly. This is the sudden path." But Hongren couldn't publicly declare this in front of monks who had spent decades polishing their mirrors. They would riot. They would harm Huineng. So he said dismissively, "This shows no understanding. Ignore it." That night, in darkness, Hongren went to the rice mill. He found Huineng still working, pounding rice by moonlight. "The rice is white enough," Hongren said quietly. It was code. "The rice is white. Your mind is clear. You've seen your original nature." Hongren transmitted the teaching then, in the rice mill, to an illiterate laborer. He gave Huineng the robe and bowl. "You are the sixth patriarch," he said, "but you must leave tonight. The other monks will not understand. Some may try to harm you. Go south. Hide for a time. Let the teaching mature. When the time is right, teach." Huineng left that night. He disappeared for years. Eventually he emerged as a teacher, and his understanding transformed Chan Buddhism completely. The lineage passed through him, not through the learned Shengxiu. This story is about you right now. You've been polishing the mirror for years, reading books about how to be better, taking courses on fixing yourself, practicing techniques to improve your mind, your habits, your life. You've accumulated so much knowledge about what's wrong with you and how to correct it. You're Sheng Xiu, writing the verse about constant polishing. It's not wrong. Practice is necessary. Cultivation is real. But somewhere in all that polishing, you've lost sight of something. The mirror was never dirty. Your Buddha nature, your fundamental clarity, was never damaged. The dust you're trying so hard to remove is appearing on the surface, but it's not touching the mirror itself. You've been polishing and polishing, believing that eventually, after enough work, you'll finally be okay. But you've always been okay. This doesn't mean stop practicing. Huineng still had to pound rice for months. He still had to work, had to live, had to function. The teaching isn't do nothing because you're already enlightened. The teaching is practice from the understanding that you're fundamentally whole, not from the belief that you're fundamentally broken. Sheng Xiu's approach: I'm defiled, and I need to clean myself through constant effort. This creates exhaustion, endless striving, the feeling of never being good enough. Huineng's approach: dust appears, but doesn't stick to what I fundamentally am. I practice to see this clearly, not to become something I'm not. This creates freedom, sustainable effort, peace with yourself as you are. Your anxious thoughts, they're dust appearing on the mirror. They're not evidence that your mind is broken. Your difficulty with people, dust. Your struggles, dust. The dust is real. It causes problems, but it's not your fundamental nature. When you understand this, practice changes. You still work with anxious thoughts using the teachings from earlier, watching the restless mind, not accepting poison, setting boundaries, but you do it from a different place. Not, I need to fix myself because I'm damaged, but I'm clearing away what obscures my original clarity. The difference feels subtle, but it changes everything. When you believe you're broken, every failure confirms it. See, I'm still anxious after all this practice. I'm hopeless. When you understand your original nature, failure is just dust, temporarily visible. Anxiety appeared. That's what happens. It doesn't define what I am. This is what exhausts people about endless self-improvement, believing you'll finally be okay after enough work. But there's always more dust, always more to fix, always evidence you're still not good enough. Huineng's teaching frees you from that trap. You're already okay. Practice helps you see it clearly, but the okayness isn't created by practice. It's revealed by it. Some people hear this and misunderstand. They think it means, I can just believe I'm enlightened and stop working on myself. No. Huineng pounded rice for months. He lived humbly for years after receiving transmission. Seeing your original nature doesn't exempt you from life. It changes your relationship to life. You still feel anxiety, but you're not identified with it. You still set boundaries, but not from the belief that you need to defend a fundamentally fragile self. You still practice, but not to become worthy, to express what you already are. Think about how you've been approaching everything you've heard tonight. Have you been listening as someone broken who needs fixing? Someone who needs to learn these teachings so you can finally become okay. Someone accumulating more knowledge about how to polish your mirror. Or can you hear it differently? These teachings clear away what obscures your original clarity. They don't create something new. They reveal what's been here all along. The restless mind teaching, not to fix your broken mind, but to see the space that contains the restlessness. The boundary teaching, not because you're weak and need protection, but because you're clear enough to know what serves and what doesn't. The equanimity teaching, not to achieve some special state, but to see that your fundamental nature isn't touched by changing circumstances. Both verses are true. You need Shengxiu's patient cultivation. You need Huineng's direct seeing. Most people need to polish the mirror for a long time before they can see it clearly enough to realize it was never dirty. But holding both truths changes the quality of practice. You practice knowing that dust will appear. That's what dust does. You work with it skillfully, not from desperation. You trust the process because you're not trying to become something you're not. You're uncovering what you've always been. Right now, as you hear these words, what if nothing is wrong with you? What if the anxiety, the struggle, the difficulty, what if these are just dust appearing on a mirror that remains fundamentally clear? What if you don't need to achieve some future state of okayness because you're already okay at a level deeper than your current struggles? This isn't denying your pain. The dust is real. The suffering is real. But you're not the dust. You're the clear mirror that dust appears on. Huineng, the illiterate rice pounder, saw this directly, not because he was special, but because he wasn't carrying the weight of believing he needed to become something other than what he was. The scholars were so busy accumulating knowledge about enlightenment that they missed the direct seeing. The rice pounder, with nothing to prove and nothing to achieve, saw clearly. You've been carrying the weight of self-improvement for so long. All the teachings tonight, all the practices, they're meant to lighten that weight, not add to it. The mirror needs no polishing. It only needs to be seen. And in seeing it, everything you've learned tonight comes together, not as fix for what's broken, but as recognition of what's always been whole. Remember the weight you carried when we began, the thoughts that wouldn't quiet, the criticism you couldn't shake, the people whose expectations had become cages. How does it feel now? Not because anything external changed. Your circumstances are the same, but you've walked through 8 stories that show you something your anxious mind kept hidden. You already have what you need. The restless mind settles when you stop fighting it. Others' poison only harms you if you accept it. Boundaries protect without cruelty. Changing circumstances don't define your worth. Discipline creates space for clarity. Steady effort carries you through storms. And beneath all of it, the mirror that needs no polishing. These aren't steps to master. They're not evidence of how much work you still need to do. They're reminders of what's been true all along, that the peace you've been seeking isn't something you achieve through enough effort. It's what remains when you stop adding suffering to difficulty. The stories you've heard tonight aren't distant wisdom from ancient times. They're portraits of what becomes possible when you remember nothing is fundamentally wrong with you. Carry them as companions. Return to them when you forget. The creature in the forest, the golden peacock, the serpent who learned to hiss, the minister in prison, the young scholar, the swimmer, the rice pounder, they're all pointing to the same truth. The peace you seek is already here. It always was. You just needed to remember how to see it.